Throughout World War II, there were huge scores of massacres carried out inside of German-occupied lands, and one of the largest took place in a ravine near to the Ukrainian capital of Kyiv. In just 2 days, on the 29th and 30th of September 1941, 33,771 people were slaughtered in a horrific action carried out by the Einsatzgruppe and collaborating forces. The Einsatzgruppen were death squads who rampaged throughout lands which were captured by the Wehrmacht, and they carried out genocidal actions and had an overall death toll in the millions. They were ruthless killers. At Babi Yar, the victims were Ukrainian Jews in Kyiv, and it became the largest mass murder conducted by the Nazi regime on the Eastern Front, and it is regarded as the single largest massacre of the Holocaust. In total, it's believed that between 100,000 to 150,000 people were slaughtered at Babi Yar during the war years. But how did this happen, and what specifically occurred inside that ravine? The site of Babi Yar had been used for different purposes over the centuries. A military encampment had been set up there years before, and it was also a cemetery. But with the advent of the Second World War on the horizon, it was a wasteland. As the Germans pushed forward into the Soviet Union, their death squads continued to round up civilians and massacre them in large pits. Axis troops occupied Kyiv on the 19th of September 1941, and explosives which had been planted by the Soviet NKVD, the secret police, damaged the city, and there was an explosion 5 days later, on the 24th of September, at the rear headquarters of Army Group South. With this, 2 days later, Major General Kurt Eberhard, the military governor, and SS Obergruppenführer Friedrich Jeckeln, the SS and police leader, met, and in reprisal they decided to exterminate all Jewish people inside of Kyiv in retaliation for the explosions and the damage. Other Einsatzgruppe commanders were present at the meeting, such as Paul Blobel, and it was Sonderkommando 4A of Einsatzgruppe C, commanded by Blobel, who were tasked with carrying out the massacre. On the 26th of September, an order was posted in the city saying, all Jews of the city of Kyiv and its vicinity must appear on Monday the 29th of September by 8 o'clock in the morning at the corner of Melenkova and Doktyerskaya streets near to the Vilsko cemetery. Bring documents, money and valuables, and also warm clothing, linen, etc. Any who do not follow this order and are found elsewhere will be shot. Any civilians who enter the dwellings left by Jews and appropriate the things in them will be shot. Of course, seeing this, thousands turned up, and they were tricked into thinking they were going to be resettled or moved elsewhere. Some may have heard about the crimes the Germans had committed before, for example in Poland, but that morning thousands turned up. They had moved on towards Babi Yar, and they brought with them their identity documents, some clothes and other valuables. When they got to the ravine, many were gathered, and the sound of gunshots may have been heard. The victims would have known what was coming for them. The method of killing was gunshot, or a shot to the neck. It was a ruthless and harrowing event, and the victims were all ordered to leave their belongings in one pile, and they were then ordered to undress. It's believed that the crowd was so big that most of the victims did not know what was happening to them until it was too late, and by the time they were being pushed towards the ravine, there was absolutely no chance of escape. Naked, they were driven down a corridor of soldiers in groups of 10. They walked into the ravine, clambered over the dead bodies of those who had gone before and who had been shot minutes before. The bodies were stacked in layers. One man who witnessed the executions claimed, once undressed, they were led into a ravine which was about 150 metres long and 30 metres wide, and a good 15 metres deep. When they reached the bottom of the ravine, they were seized by members of the Schutzpolizei and made to lie down on top of Jews who had already been shot. The corpses were literally in layers. A police marksman came along and shot each person in the neck with a submachine gun. I saw these marksmen stand on layers of corpses and shoot one after the other. The marksman would walk across the bodies of the executed to the next one, who had meanwhile laid down, and shoot him. Another witness claimed that, I watched what happened when the Jews, Men, women and children arrived. They led them past a number of different places, where one after the other they had given up their luggage, then their coats, shoes and overgarments, and also underwear. They also had to leave their valuables in a designated place. There was a special pile for each article of clothing. It all happened very quickly, and anyone who hesitated was kicked or pushed by guards to keep them moving. This all shows the ruthlessness and harrowing efficiency of the executions of Babi Yar. To the executioners, they were not dealing with humans, and they were driven to do this by their horrific Nazi ideology and beliefs. In just 2 days, according to the Einsatzgruppe's situational report, 33,771 people were exterminated and were shot in just 2 days on the 29th and 30th of September 1941. The valuables and possessions they had brought were given over to local ethnic Germans and the Nazi administration. Many of those who were wounded and were not killed by the initial gunshot were buried alive in the ravine as the dirt covered their bodies. The commander of the Einsatzkommando who carried out the shooting documented that the difficulties resulting from such large-scale actions, in particular concerning the seizure, were overcome in Kiev by requesting the Jewish population through wall posters to move. Although only a participation of approximately 5,000 to 6,000 Jews had been expected at first, more than 30,000 Jews arrived who, until the very moment of their execution, still believed in their resettlement, thanks to an extremely clever organisation. What this meant was that the Nazis did not anticipate the huge number of victims that did arrive. But it wasn't just those 2 days that saw bloodshed and death at Babi Yar. In the months that followed, thousands more were shot in the ravine. It's estimated that more than 100,000 people from Kiev, mostly civilians, were murdered by the Nazis during World War II there. There was later a concentration camp nearby set up. When the Soviets liberated the city, they came across the massacre site. One survivor claimed that men were ordered to disinter all the bodies in the ravine. The Germans meanwhile took a party to a nearby Jewish cemetery, whence marble headstones were brought to Babi Yar to form the foundation of a huge funeral pyre. Atop the stones were piled a layer of wood and then a layer of bodies, and so on until the pyre was as high as a 2-story house. It was said that approximately 1,500 bodies were burned in each operation on the furnace, and each funeral pyre took 2 days and 1 night to burn completely. The cremation went on for 40 days, and then the prisoners, who by this time included 341 men, were ordered to build another furnace. Since this was the last furnace and there were no more bodies, the prisoners realised it was for them. They made a break, but only a dozen out of more than 200 survived the bullets of the Nazi machine guns. The Nazis had tried to conceal their atrocities and crimes, and they oversaw special actions which saw the bodies exhumed, burned, and then the ashes being scattered over a nearby farmland. At the end of World War II, a number of SS commandos who had been involved in the massacre and slaughter at Babi Yar were brought to trial, and some were hanged inside of Landsberg prison on the gallows. Paul Blobel suffered this fate for his involvement, and there were more. Some were even publicly hanged on gallows in front of huge crowds. But Babi Yar became one of the deadliest sites of slaughter of the Second World War, and in just 2 days, over 33,000 people were executed, all deceived, believing they were going to be sent elsewhere and resettled. But the truth was more harrowing and shocking. Still today, some of the victims lie inside of the ravine. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.